Lovely.
Okay. Good morning, Washington, D.C., and good afternoon, Amman, Berlin, and Moscow. Welcome to this e-policy circle, very special one as always, but particularly with this fantastic group. It's the 22nd e-policy circle of Beirut Institute Summit in Abu Dhabi, which we hope next year you will give us the honor of attending. As usual, the conversation will be global and it will be geopolitical and it will be a lot of fun and we will learn a lot by the time we finish with it. We'll have to start with introducing His Royal Highness Prince Hassan bin Talal, and then we have with us Ambassador Boris Ruge. We have Paul Brinkley and Fyodor Lukyanov. You know who they are, that's why you have joined us. So I'll start by giving His Royal Highness Prince Hassan bin Talal the 4 minutes. The floor is yours. Please begin, Your Highness.
Thank you, Ragida. I'd like to remind the panel that when the Sustainable Development Goals were launched in 2015, the slogan went up, leave no one behind. But among the 200 indicators of global development, sustainable development, and across 17 goals, there was no reference to the word refugee. My small country has quadrupled its population since the 1990s. That is to say, our population is governed by a refugee population by 19 silos, United Nations organizations, without any perceived goal to addressing the world refugee and migration system, of which I am honored to be an honorary chair with Madeleine, Albright, Lloyd Axworthy, and others. We are launching our report on Tuesday next and hoping to discuss it in a series of webinars, asking for a call for action in terms of refugees. And I'd like to say as an Arab Muslim that 80% of the world's refugees are Muslim. So the reference to our region geopolitically in 1908 by Halford Mackinder, the great geopolitician, was to refer to the Near East as the world's island. And this island, of course, is now not only the Levant. I wish it were the Levant stability would be taken integrally and more seriously. There's a meeting as we speak called for by, I believe, the Russian Ministry of Defense in Damascus on the subject of refugees, but unfortunately it has been boycotted by the United States and by Europe and by Turkey. Well, Turkey at least is not attending. Lebanon is expected to attend, and that is because of Iranian encouragement, if I can put it politely. But I would like to say that the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, displaced communities are regarded as peripheral rather than a major concern. So if we are going to talk of security today, let me remind you that basic security, of course, is weapons of mass destruction, which leads us to MAD, mutually assured destruction. And the current security is mass, mutually assured survival. And in that, of course, we are told that anti-terrorism is a major issue. But I'd like to point out that human dignity and the enabling and empowering of the poor for citizenship in our region and in many regions in the world has to be taken seriously. You can see agreements between states, between Gulf states and Israel, between regional states and external powers, and even local regional powers, and the case is very clear in both Yemen and Libya. But no one is actually reminding themselves of the proportionality. Libya's population works out to 96% of an Australia, for example. And so in reality, human dignity and human life is not only very cheap, not only very peripheral, but marginalized to an extreme. And my concern in this region is that we look at the Eastern Mediterranean and the Black Sea on the one side. We see General McKenzie of the Central Command talking about his responsibilities bordering the Russian Federation. But on the same side, of course, many of our countries are so-called major non-NATO allies. I would be very interested to know whether he defines his role as a NATO role or an American role. And in terms of the regional polarities, I think that it's very clear that with the visit of President Sisi to Greece today, saying that he will take the side of the Greeks in a confrontation with the Turks, that we are going back to Byzantine politics. The fragmentation within states is very clear. So I would hope that the rallying call of the immediate future in think tanks is to take time out and to consider speaking plainly to each other, which obviously we can only do up to a certain point in a panel discussion like this, and to understand that the corollary of our situation is denied education, which is so important, sustainable livelihoods, meaningful participation. We just had elections in Jordan today, and we only had a turnout of less than 30%. So I would say we would like to participate and to partner with you in waging peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, definitely. Waging peace is a very dangerous word, because how do we wage peace when we are having such a fragmented word, as you said? Where
not piecemeal, I hope.
Not piecemeal.
not
don't have peace in a piecemeal approach. That's not
exactly
very
exactly.
Thank you, Prince Hassan. I'm going to go to Boris Ruge now, 4 minutes to you, and then we'll engage on many of the things that Prince Hassan put to the table. Please, Boris Ruge.
Many thanks, Haida. Delighted to join you and your very distinguished guests today. Thanks for having me. So a few thoughts about transatlantic relations after the US elections that we lived through, I could perhaps say last week. European leaders, as we could see yesterday, are engaging with President-elect Biden. Biden spoke to Emmanuel Macron, Angela Merkel, Boris Johnson, and the Prime Minister of Ireland yesterday. And if we look at the agenda that emerges from the readouts, we can see that, for example, Merkel and Biden spoke about strengthening transatlantic relations, including through NATO and the EU, working together on the pandemic, working on economic recovery, and addressing climate change. Those were the topics that were highlighted. Obviously, many European leaders were relieved to see Biden elected, not because they prefer Democrats over Republicans, but because they're happy to see a president in the White House who sees Europe as a partner and an ally rather than as an adversary, which President Trump, I think, frequently articulated as his view of the relationship. Our key interest in Europe is to have the US by our sides and keep America engaged on European security. And in order to achieve that, we'll have to do more to look after our own security in Europe, to become more capable of dealing with challenges in the neighborhood. And that also means not always looking to the US to fix things on our behalf. Importantly, it also means coming to an agreement with the United States on how to deal with China. Across the board, China is now seen in Washington as a systemic rival. Europeans, I think, have evolved in their thinking. Increasingly, China is seen as a rival, systemic rival, as a competitor, but there's no coherent policy yet, and we'll have to come together with the United States on that. And of course, there's issues such as climate change and trade that we have to address as well. One final thought, Donald Trump got 70 million votes in this presidential election, not insignificant, I would say. And Republicans are likely to hang on to a majority in the Senate. So I think Europeans are well advised to continue to engage with Republicans, and they're well advised to reflect on the fact that there's 70 million people out there who opted for Donald Trump rather than Joe Biden. And ultimately, we should hope for a US foreign policy that has bipartisan support, Also because we're looking for stability. We don't want US foreign policy to oscillate between a Trumpian view and a Biden view. We want something that's more stable and that lasts longer than a 4-year presidential term. And Joe Biden, I think, is the kind of person who could deliver that. He's somebody who is keen on a bipartisan approach on working across the aisle. So I'll leave it at that and back to you.
That's wonderful. Listen, I'm gonna just ask a question quickly before I forget it to everybody with a yes or no only. I mean, obviously, Boris, Ruge, you're suggesting that it's over. The US elections are over. Biden is president. Doesn't matter what Donald Trump says. Is this what everybody feels? It's over, it's done deal? Boris, is that what you meant? There is no, you're not giving any chance to the.
But if you have the president of France, the prime minister of the United Kingdom, the chancellor of Germany engaging with Joe Biden as president-elect, I think that tells you something about how people see the situation. And they have no interest of becoming involved in US domestic politics, but they simply see no scenario where Donald Trump comes back.
Quickly, Prince Hassan, on this, you think it's a done deal? That's it, Joe Biden is president no matter what Donald Trump says?
It's over, but there are unforeseen consequences for Joe Biden.
Okay. Fyodor, before I go to Paul Brinkley, what do you, on this very same point? Fyodor Lukyanov.
No, I don't believe it might be changed. I don't know whether it was a very fair election, but no doubt that Biden will become the president.
Paul Brinkley, answer this before you do your 4 minutes, please. Same question to you. Paul Brinkley?
Sorry, I had to unmute. So I think that it is extremely unlikely at this point that there's a change in the projected outcome.
Then you have 4 minutes to you, Paul Brinkley, enlighten us.
Great, so thank you so much. It's an honor to be here today. It's really an honor to be here with these esteemed colleagues. I want to pick up a couple of the threads that were already brought up and tie into them. And I want to focus my comments on what I'm going to describe as the tectonic forces that have made establishing stability so difficult in this past decade, 2-decade period, which we associate with 9/11 and the aftermath and the US reaction or overreaction, but in reality, I think have as much to do with impacts of technology and technology change and what they're doing to labor markets and financial systems that are creating incredible difficulties to policymakers as they try to sustain middle-class dynamics within established economies, or for those in the Middle East, the incredibly difficult effort underway to create middle-class dynamics and stability upon which liberal institutions, and by liberal institutions, I don't mean in the political term, but I mean institutions that support and sustain human rights, human well-being, and to His Excellency Prince Hassan's point, human dignity. I believe that right now, as a byproduct of all of these forces, I'm describing them as tectonic forces, the elimination of cost of labor due to automation, due to technology, has broken a globalization system that enabled the uplift of unskilled workers throughout the world and allowed the establishment in East Asia of middle-class economic dynamics. That system and those abilities to use and to transfer work to places where unskilled labor could be taken and could be uplifted over time, that system has broken. Automation has made the financial driver of those decisions break down. It has also caused in the West and in the established economies, Europe, the United States, elsewhere, it's creating incredible downward pressure on middle-class economics, on the middle class. In the United States, we see this reflected in a bias and an emerging economic nationalism on the right, and on the left, and radicalization. I will leave comments on Europe to my colleague in Berlin, but to me, these are the tectonic forces that make stabilization incredibly difficult today. I spent a good bit of my career in the Middle East, ran enterprises in the region myself. I never heard anyone who worked for me or my organizations express anything different than the aspirations of people I worked with in China or the United States. They wanted a job, they wanted their children to be educated, they wanted opportunity, and they wanted safety and security. And I also have never found anywhere in human history those things emerging in the absence of a broad-based middle-class economic infrastructure. If we do not establish that and sustain it where it exists, we can't have stability. So when we talk about the election dynamics in the United States, when we talk about Brexit in Europe, when we talk about the challenges, unbelievable challenges, the Crown Prince or the Prince faces in Jordan, what you're facing in Lebanon, these are all being made much more difficult by these tectonic forces that are buffeting global institutions, national institutions. And so to me, this is the crisis of our age. How do we grapple with these technology transitions that are happening in the midst of so much human awareness, again, driven by technology, of the gap between individual lives, the life I live in Amman, Jordan, or the life I live in parts of the EU compared to other people's lives, and the frustrations it creates in terms of expectations and demands on national and international leaders to create opportunity. So I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this. I think it's a great panel, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yes, it is a great panel. We will go now to Fyodor Lokyanov, and 4 minutes to you, Fyodor, and then we engage in this discussion of the many points, fantastic points made so far. Please, Fyodor Lokyanov, to you, 4 minutes.
Thank you very much. And this is really a very good, well-organized discussion, very, very concise. So based upon what has been said before, I maybe extend a little bit towards the issue of regional and local conflicts, which are more and more around us. And we see that pandemic didn't change the international political agenda. So no one conflict disappeared, some new appear. And of course, we are entering another period of international relations. What we experienced 2020 did not change completely what was before, but many trends which we witnessed, they are now accelerated and catalyzed. So the speed of general changes in the international system is higher now than before. In this regard, I think that the main event last week, presidential election in the United States, which is perceived by many as an opportunity to be back to more traditional political leadership on the one hand, and political guidance and regulation on the other hand. Okay, Donald Trump, who was a very unconventional president, is over, so the new team will be committed to the traditional way to conduct international politics. I doubt that this will be possible, even if a new president of the United States and his administration will try to do it, because the notion of leadership should be totally re-established and reformulated in the new world, which is fragmented already now and seems to be more fragmented in the future. So pandemic suddenly confirmed what has been discussed before, that the globalization can be stopped like this, so very, very quickly. Of course, we will be back to a more globalized environment after this disease will be defeated, but I doubt that we'll be back to this universalist and globalized consciousness as we enjoyed after the Cold War until this spring. Which means that regional conflicts, which we see everywhere, should be addressed in a different way. And in this regard, I don't believe that US leadership, even reinstated, will be able to be very instrumental in many of them. Yesterday, we had a surprising development in Nagorno-Karabakh suddenly, the very old conflict with no progress for many, many years. Now we see that it's settled for a while, of course, not finally, but the way how it was settled is completely different from what people expected. This is much more like a great gamble or great game in 19th century between two empires or former empires, and suddenly it proved to be much more efficient than all multilateral attempts made before. I think it's, of course, it's not settled yet. We will see. But I guess that that might be considered as another example of how different a world will be in the future.
All right, very good. Let me stop here for and take up the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh and take it around, because I want to do this first, and then I want to do the issue of JCPOA, Iran, and the reflection in the post-elections. So you're saying, let me stay with you a little bit, Fyodor Lukyanov. You're saying right now that it is Russia and Turkey who have resolved the Azerbaijan-Armenia issue and away from the US, and the Minsk approach, which had US and France and etc. I mean, all of a sudden, we are supposed to put faith in a collaboration or cooperation between Russia and Turkey when there's really bad blood between the two of you, both in Syria and in Libya. Figure this one out for me. Is this like the way to reviving your partnership, or is this a one-off success?
No, it's not one-off success. It's a very, very strange kind of partnership. I would say pretty unprecedented, which is based on something which is not trust at all, which is not coincidence of interests. It's just a collision of interest everywhere, in Libya, in Syria, in Nagorno-Karabakh, everywhere. But there is an understanding that those powers have most of leverage, first, and secondly, if they work against each other, be it Middle East, Northern Africa, or Southern Caucasus, both will suffer. Neither will be able to achieve what it wants. And that is a very, very new phenomenon.
Prince Hassan, with the Democratic Biden administration coming in, do you think there is going to be a quick embrace, re-embrace of the JCPOA, the nuclear deal with Iran, without any conditions, or do you think?
Well, I'm of the view that if the nuclear deal can be preserved until the Biden inauguration, there is every justification for the participation of the United States in the JCPOA, or in what is really transatlantic cooperation. That's what we're talking about. So that is one point. Of course, Iran has to come back into full compliance. That is obviously, it has to be said. But in terms of the front ending of troops in different countries in the region, as my Russian colleague referred to, Syria and of course Nagorno-Karabakh and Libya, I think that this is supporting the regional players. I mean, so long as there is an Erdogan and an Aliyev, I support the view that has been expressed in writing before me, that it's going to be very difficult to fill a vacuum. So in addition to that, I think it is tone deaf, and I quote from a brilliant article written in front of me in commentary by Elie Geran-Meyer, whom you may know, that it is tone deaf to suggest the placing of troops who have, by nationality, a long history in that part of the world. I mean, it would be like placing Japanese troops in Korea, for example, between North and South.
Prince Hassan, about the JC and the return to the nuclear deal, are you suggesting that it's your view that it's going to be an easy return, clean slate, that just open it up again, like as if nothing has happened?
I'm a member of the...
Because I thought there were conditions, Prince Hassan, forgive me, that were put by that Biden team to say we need to speak about the missiles, we need to speak about the behavior of Iran. Can you explain? Because you seem to think that it's like, unless I misunderstood you, it's going to be like quick return, no problem.
No, I think that the return to the agreement is one thing, but the package of issues to which you are referring, the profile and character of countries falling as they do between China and on the one side and the transatlantic community of the other is extremely important. Remember, we have 3 maverick countries in the region in nuclear terms already, and Iran is not one of them. Israel, Pakistan, and India. So when we're talking about nuclear capabilities in this region, I think the question of Iran is still a wannabe nuclear power.
Fyodor Lokhanov, I'll give you a quick word before I go to Boris Ruge. You wanted to come in on this. Go ahead, Fyodor.
Yeah, I wanted just to say that from my point of view, there is absolutely no way to be back to the deal as it was signed 2015. Of course, both US and Iran probably will try to negotiate something new. That's very interesting whether Russia will be invited to participate or not, because I don't believe Biden administration will be very keen to do it.
Wait, are you saying that there's going to be a return to discussing this bilaterally, not 5+1 or 3+3 as they call it, the Europeans? Fyodor, I'm still with you.
No, bilaterally it's difficult to imagine, but certainly some correction of the format is expectable.
Boris Ruge, you know a lot about this issue, and so fill us in, because I think Fyodor Lokhanov is correct in saying I mean, there's been too much going on, even in the European position, to say we need a new deal. It's not going to be a return to the JCPOA as was. What is your view on this? Where are the Europeans going to go with it? Please, Boris Ruge.
So there was an option, of course, to address concerns that were held not just by Republicans in the US Congress, but also by many Democrats about Iranian behavior in the region, support for terrorism, the missile program, and so on. And in 2017 and 18, there was a conversation with the United States, with the Trump administration, on how we could tackle those issues. And at the end of the day, the president decided that he wanted to get out of the JCPOA. That was his priority. And so these conversations came to nothing. And then on top of that, the US government went ahead and put a great deal of pressure on its European allies to also get out of the deal. And it's remarkable that France, the UK, and Germany resisted this very strongly and did the maximum to keep the deal going. It's very difficult to do that, and we learned that the hard way. Remarkable in particular that London, that is so dependent on a good relationship with the United States after Brexit, stood with France and Germany on this. So the first thing that you could do is a Biden administration could allow for the E3 to stay in the deal and to give Iran some of the benefits of the deal while engaging with the Europeans on how to tackle those problematic aspects of Iranian behavior on which certainly between Berlin and Paris and London, all of us agree.
How do you square this with the issue of sanctions? Because right now it seems to me, and then this is a question to all of you actually, it seems to me that the Trump administration is able to go on being a working administration at least till mid-January, and they can impose sanctions over sanctions on top of sanctions that are not necessarily nuclear related, that they can be, say, for example, on Iran because of its association of support of terrorism and that sort of thing. And the issue of course, the missiles. So if that happens, Boris, Ruge, stay with me on this, the sanctions issue. How are you going to square all of this all together? I mean, are you going to be, go ahead, you answer me.
No, I'll be very brief. I think, obviously there's time until the 20th of January for the Trump administration to do all sorts of things. But obviously the clock is ticking, and that, that means that there's a time limit on this policy. I'm sure that Paul is better placed to understand what exactly the Trump administration can do within those 2 months.
Go ahead, exactly, Paul. I had that question in mind for you. Please answer it.
Yes, I think, look, I don't believe we're going to see a radical ratcheting up vis-a-vis Iran. I could be wrong. I think what's almost more interesting is that we whether we agree with or disagree with what's transpired vis-a-vis the JCPOA over the past 4 years, where we are today, the nature of the relationship in the regime in Iran vis-a-vis Europe and the circumstances in Europe and the US and the circumstances in the US are fundamentally different than where we were in 2012 when that process began. And so to be able to, I certainly believe the new administration will immediately change its tone. There'll be an immediate shift. So many of the leaders coming into the new administration were key involved players in creating the JCPOA. There's a natural sympathy to try to resurrect that. That will take place. But I think the challenge for everyone is going to be when one looks at the effect of the exit of the JCPOA by the United States on the Iranian regime and its behaviors, be it unfortunate executions of dissidents in recent years. I mean, there's just been an escalating series of unfortunate acts within the regime and strengthening of hardline elements within the regime that are going to make it extremely difficult to turn the clock back. And I think it's going to be some very careful diplomacy required to ensure that the objectives that were set in 2012 to 16 can be achieved in a new framework, whether it's multilateral, bilateral, trilateral, whatever the structure is. I think it's going to require some objective overview by open-eyed people who can look at the reality of the current situation and not try to resurrect what is unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your point of view, a very broken situation.
How long do you think, Paul Brinkley, it's going to take for the Biden administration to resume the JCPOA in any which way that has been discussed? And again, talk to me about the sanctions. Are they able, do they have the means legally to just take off all the sanctions just like that of Iran, of Hezbollah, of the Revolutionary Guards? Explain that to me. Is a new administration able to just wipe clean all these sanctions, sets of sanctions, all of them, just like that? Or, for example, the Magnitsky Act, for example, that's law. Can you explain that to us, Paul Brinkley?
Yeah, so look, in the US, we've seen an incredible acquisition of executive authority through executive order. This goes back to several presidencies. So there are a significant number of things that can be done within the Treasury Department, within policy, around relaxing or strengthening particular sanction regimes and how they're enforced. And then there's statute, legal structure, which cannot be wiped away. So we have this fuzziness between what's in statute and what's enforced, and the liberalization of executive orders in the United States that over the, again, past 2 or 3 administrations have seen an accumulation of power within the executive that creates a lot of opportunity. So the question, does the political dynamic within the Democratic Party support a rapid liberalization of how statutes are enforced? That's not clear to me right now, but I do think you'll see an immediate change in the tenor around the issue, the rhetoric, which, let's be honest, has been a big, if there's one universal frustration over the past 4 years, there's policy and then there's rhetoric, and rhetoric has been extremely aggressive over the past 4 years.
Boris Ruge, you want to come in on this before I go to Prince Hassan? Go ahead, Boris Ruge.
Just a two-finger. I think the Biden administration is going to be extremely careful not to be seen as being lenient, as being soft on Iran. And the US Congress is full of Democrats who at the time took a very critical view of the JCPOA and didn't necessarily support it. So I think they will have a very different approach, but they're not naive about Iran and about Iranian behavior in the region. They know a lot of the Democratic senators, congressmen, and women expect them to be tough. So I think it's going to be a combination of things. Maybe there's going to be more space for the Europeans to keep the JCPOA going as the US looks at its options. But at the same time, reaching out to Europeans to address the aspects of Iranian behavior that are so problematic.
Very interesting. Prince Hassan, whose responsibility is it to make sure that the issue of Iranian behavior is brought into this any revival or any new shape of a JCPOA, because in the past, the 3+3, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council plus Germany agreed to just dismiss that part, do not discuss, because they were focused on nuclear and only nuclear. Is it your responsibility as Arab leaders, as Arab thought leaders, to just say, well, wait a minute, we need to discuss that, and how do you do it? Is anybody lobbying with the Biden administration on that? And do you think the Biden administration is going to really care? They just want, their priority could be that, let's just have an easy and a quick success story, and reviving the JCPOA could be. Prince Hassan.
The Gulf region, of course, has its own context, and of course that context is fractured at the moment by their own differences. It is heavily invested in by transatlantic presence, which makes it feel safe. And but on the other hand, I'd like to say that the hinterland countries, of which we are one, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, the Palestinians, and Israel, for that matter, geographically a hinterland country, have very little to say in terms of geopolitical realities. And I think that the question of sanctions, which you asked about, should stop being a question of bilateralism, but should be discussed among many other issues in terms of building a conference for security and cooperation in the Middle East region. I'm not as enthusiastic anymore about the weapons of mass destruction free zone, because nobody will listen. But I do think that in terms of this region, and by which I mean the Schwerpunkt, is it in German, the Schwerpunkt, the point of leverage of Afghanistan and Iran, falls once again between China on the move with its terrestrial Silk Route and its maritime Silk Route, and on the other side, the transatlantic community, who talk about the good neighborhood policy, but don't take it a step further. Now, maybe that transatlantic link has been restored, Arabs, at least like any other nationality in the region, will have some kind of an indication of what the Security Council members are talking about, if they take time out in the next couple of months and begin to think together.
Fyodor Lukyanov, I mean, Russia should have a special role in this. Russia is a partner on the ground with Iran in Syria, so you should really be a part of curbing the enthusiasm of Iran on the regional appetite. Do you think it's time that you do that now, and when you're re-talking, hopefully re-engaging in a new nuclear discussion or nuclear deal?
So I think it's still very unclear what will happen, and Russian readiness to get engaged in this new revival of renaissance of this nuclear deal might be in place. So Mr. Ryabkov is here to stay, and he can help again. The question is whether Iran will be as enthusiastic, because I can say that relationship now is pretty how to say it, multi-dimensional, so not very easy between Russia and Iran, and you see that so much happens now simultaneously that the initial efficiency of Astana Group, for example, is now challenged as many other formats. And frankly, I don't know, the idea which you can find in Moscow among analysts, for example, today, is that Iran might be extremely willing to reach to Biden administration and to work with them directly or almost directly, rather than to use other powers as mediators. What I wanted to ask actually, Prince Hassan and maybe Paul, whatever we think about Jared Kushner's activities in the Middle East, but they changed quite a lot in recent months. And we see a different atmosphere between Israel and Gulf states, which is based on primarily on anti-Iranian sentiment. can we expect that Biden administration will totally revise it, or how they will position themselves to this series of events and continuation of that maybe?
Great question. Prince Hassan, please, you go first, and then Paul Brinkley on that.
The absence of any cultural affinity with the Palestinians is the big flaw in the peace to prosperity concept. Peace with whom? I mean, it's very clear that after the death of Saib Harigat yesterday and the outpouring of goodwill from many people, unexpectedly actually in some quarters, particularly the Israeli peace camp, that we have lost a bridge. And of course, Joe Biden has been described as not a man who establishes walls, but a man who can build bridges. So I would hope that the Palestinians, who I think have a great role in being proactive, rather than closing embassies, maybe maintaining their presence and explaining their case to other Arab countries and sympathizers all over the world, is an absolutely essential step forward. But I think the great miscalculation in the Peace for Prosperity plan is that nobody can actually fault us for having made peace per se. But on the other hand, delineating our border did not bring about a warm peace. And today to see flights of Israeli and Gulf Airlines going backwards and forwards is obviating the importance maybe of the diamond trade for the Antwerp merchants, but it's not actually developing a complementarity between peoples of the Levant. And let me remind you once again that our population has exploded. Our multi-sectoral rapid needs assessment after COVID, UNICEF, UNHCR, WFP, the situation on the ground is desperate. And I'm sitting in a prefab where, because my office has been completely closed down because we've all been affected by COVID. We put a good face on everything, but it is absolutely clear that that middle class to which you were referring, Paul, earlier, is dwindling, is seeking migration to different parts of the world, and that poverty and the ideology that it might espouse is on the rise again.
Prince Hassan, you're still in a better place than me, because I am sitting in a hotel room because my home was completely destroyed by the bomb, the nitrate explosion that devastated Beirut, the city, and also particularly the port of Beirut. So I am I sympathize with you, but my situation is a little worse because it was totally demolished.
To the center of Lebanon and Lebanese studies that we turn. It is to University of Beirut that we return. Your ability to think, your cogens has not been destroyed. And this is what we applaud about the Lebanese. But in terms of sociology, we are facing sociocide. In terms of ecology, we are facing ecocide. Let us not develop anything other than thought for maybe a Mediterranean Center for Humanities, which I've been trying to do for the last few weeks to refine this concept. We need that. Greeks, Turks, Israelis, Arabs, the Center for Humanities.
Thank you very much, Prince Hassan. You still have an outstanding question to you, Paul Brinkley. Can you just be very brief about it? And then I'm going to move on to another very important issue. Please, Paul Brinkley, go ahead.
Yes, happy. So without comment on the Levant, which has its own unique complexities, just thinking about the accelerated movement with the UAE, with Bahrain, potential, a lot of speculation about even Saudi reaching some agreement with Israel, I think cannot be considered in the absence of the regional expectations of what may be coming vis-a-vis the new administration and the JCPOA and Iran. And I think having been embedded in the region during that entire period, I'd never like to project my cultural opinions onto people who are of the region, but I'll offer as an American who was there for 11 years, we underestimate the level of instability and the rocking, the shaking of cultural deep state, deep social alignments that took place as the JCPOA unfolded, as Iraq and Syria devolved, as these, obviously the Sunni Shia and the Arab Persian energies were impacted by that. I think that helps provide a context to explain this accelerated engagement. And I think when we talk about the next 70 days or however long until inauguration of a new presidency, that's an area I really think could be very interesting. Is there further acceleration of those kind of connections between the Gulf states and Israel?
Boris, Ruge, two things to you, please, or maybe three, because I'm going to start to run out of time because I want to give each of you a minute and a half or 2 minutes at the end. So I'm going to have to go quickly with a lot of things that I still want to hear your views on. The EU presidency. How much is it gonna be a challenge for you with the new administration? What are the priorities? And tell us more. It's very interesting that the world really is sort of focused on one fantastic woman's journey. Angela Merkel will be leaving office. How is that going to impact not only Europe, but also diplomacy, European diplomacy? Go ahead, Boris Ruge.
Very quickly, the EU presidency, Germany's EU presidency, I think is relevant first and foremost for getting the recovery package adopted. And on that, we made a big step forward yesterday. There was an agreement between the Council and the European Parliament. So my colleagues negotiating in Brussels with the European Parliament made a big step forward. And that's important. It's important to keep the EU together. But that's really the key part. For the rest, I think, we will have Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, and Charles Michel, President of the European Council. They will be engaging with the President-elect and his people, much as Angela Merkel has been doing. So on the presidency, I think the key thing is the recovery package. Yesterday, it made a big step in the right direction. On Angela Merkel, we have an election coming up in September of 2021. So that's 10 months away. And it's going to be a big change in German politics. She's going to step down. She's no longer running after then 16 years in office. And right now, it's not clear who will take her place as leader of the CDU and who will be the conservative candidate for chancellor in next year's election. So it will be a new landscape. I think, it will be, she was suited in many ways to this period in Germany's and Europe's history. But it will be interesting because now the challenges are somewhat different. She cultivated very close ties to Chinese leaders over the space of 15 years. And she did very well for Germany's economy, but China has developed in a direction that is much more problematic. And in a sense, in her own party and in the Social Democratic Party and in the Green Party, to name just three, there's many who feel that we need a tougher policy on China. So when she leaves the scene, I think that's part of the dynamic that will unfold in conjunction with the fact that our American friends are going to come knocking on our door with the new Biden administration also asking us to take a tougher line.
Interesting. Fyodor Lukyanov, you said something that I need to go back to. You somehow insinuated that things are not great between Russia and Iran, as at least not they were in the past. Can you elaborate a little bit on what you mean here? And are you worried about a sort of a private deal between the Iranians and the Americans that will leave everyone behind? Do you think that could happen? As has been the case when there has been secret deals between the democratic administrations and Iran. Are you worried about Iran stepping out of your realm?
I'm not that much worried, and I actually don't expect a private deal because I don't believe that this deal is implementable and doable now due to many circumstances. What I mentioned was, what I said was that Iranians might be interested to get engaged much closer and much more intensively with the Biden administration, expecting that after Trump, just because Biden declared so many times that he will do everything differently than Trump, that the administration will be willing to take a different position. I don't believe that the Biden administration will be willing in reality and will be able to do it. And between Russia and Iran, I mean that it's not very much new. The partnership is very troubled. So if you come to Tehran, you will hear, as Russian, I did it before COVID. So normally I heard plenty of claims that Russia is treating Iran wrongly and Russia is not that reliable partner and so on. So it's difficult relationship, and when there are interests which coincide, then Russia and Iran find ways how to do it. When it needs to be done with more efforts, not necessarily Iran will be interested. But in general, of course, we are interconnected in many ways. I would love to say one thing at the end. You know, I remember that 2008, that was another very exciting election in the United States, and Europeans were so happy to see George W. Bush going and Barack Obama stepping in, because they expected that Obama will be back to this tradition, transatlantic everything. Obama was back in terms of rhetorics. He never was back in terms of policy. And I guess that this time it might be similar.
Listen, I'm going to let you give your concluding 1 minute now, Fyodor Lukyanov. But this is interesting because you must be a bit worried about what the Biden administration brings along with it in terms of NATO, in terms of other parts of the world, and in terms of the personal relationship between, or the bilateral relationship between the Democrats and Russia. So I'm going to give you your 1 minute or 1.5 minutes to conclude, and if you could squeeze in why Russia thinks that it's bound to, stay out of the fight between China and the US, okay, but if push comes to shove, you would go with the way of China. 1.5 minutes to you, please. I'm sorry, but try.
First of all, about transatlantic relationship, Biden and so on. I don't think we should overestimate the significance of persons. Yes, of course, Donald Trump was extremely colorful person. But troubles inside NATO, inside transatlantic relationships started well before Trump. And all he said was unpolite, but basically the same as Obama said and Bob Gates said and others. So I don't believe that NATO problems are connected to Trump, Biden, or anybody else. This is the problem of identification of the alliance in the new world. As for Russian place in hypothetically growing, escalating US-China competition, I think Russia will try to avoid getting involved, but certainly having China as the biggest neighbor, Russia has no reason to have bad relationship with China. So I don't believe that anybody's expectations, be it Trump or anybody else, that Russia can be taken on board of anti-Chinese campaign can come true at any point.
Thank you very much, Fyodor Lukyanov. I'm going to go to Prince Hassan bin Talal for his 1.5 to 2 minutes, if you don't mind, please, Your Highness, Your Royal Highness.
Well, I'd like to conclude by thanking you all very much for your comments. I picked up instability and the deep state, and I think we haven't dwelt enough on the fact that countries in the region are being dealt with bilaterally, which means that in terms of favored bilateralism, they are actually encouraged to be more, not less authoritarian. And I think that the demise of the Arab Spring and the absence of a democratic alternative is a tragedy that cannot be explained other than in the businesses as usual of the polarities of hatred and enmity, antagonisms which have existed for the last 70 years since the beginning of the Truman Doctrine. And I think that this has to be taken into consideration if we're going to talk in the future about executive orders justifying this or that form of action on a unilateral or bilateral plane, or whether we are generally going to speak about stabilizing a region multilaterally with everything that that means. We are a region that imports every single drop of water that we drink. The Global Risks Report of 2020 of the WEF, unfortunately, makes no mention of existential issues relating between peoples. I mean, it is as if, as someone has said, states cannot afford to be universal citizens. So I think that this concept of universalism is a concept of human cooperation. And this is why I would hope that the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, which by the way coincides with the 75th anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, could actually be an anniversary of rethinking institution building. I'm proud to say that 19 Arabs, largely graduates of the AUB, participated in building that UN, and I hope that we will be asked to perform our international responsibilities once again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Royal Highness, Prince Hassan bin Talal. I'm going to go to Paul Brinkley, a minute and a half for you, Paul, and then I'm going to go to Boris with the same amount of time. Please, Paul Brinkley.
Thank you so much. To pick up on something Mr. Lukhanov and His Excellency Prince Hassan stated, we are in an era, and to reinforce my earlier comment, where technology, visibility to extreme personality, we're very tempted to ignore the underpinning forces that are driving so many of these issues we're facing. I mentioned earlier the pressures on middle classes, making it difficult to create economic opportunity in an area with youth bulge like we see in the Middle East, or pressures in the EU, pressures in the United States. We are so focused on the individual personalities in the political leadership and putting our faith in individual humans' ability to radically alter these tectonic shifts that are happening. And if the policy framework can begin to shift to how do we maintain and strengthen and establish middle-class economics, that's rarely discussed as an objective. We talk about stability as an objective. We talk about security as an objective. We ignore the foundational underpinning that creates the ability to have those things in our policy discussions. And I would argue the same point when we talk about deep societal infrastructural issues and how we address those. It's so tempting to project our hopes and fears and our resentments onto individual political figures, which in this era are going to get more and more extreme, more and more bombastic in their nature of their communication. And the risk in that is that we don't deal in this time of extremes change that's destabilizing institutions throughout the world. It's difficult to make any progress in that kind of a situation.
Thank you very much, Paul Brinkley. And last but not least, Boris Ruge.
Thanks very much, Arida. Thanks for having me at this discussion. Lots of good points, I thought. And I entirely agree with Paul and also with His Royal Highness that, that we must not lose sight of these structural underlying developments. Absolutely, absolutely true. As for the direction of US foreign policy under President-elect Biden, I think Biden is going to reach out to Europe. You could see that yesterday. It's no coincidence that he spoke to 4 European heads of state and government in his first outreach. So that's the good news. But China will loom large, and a lot of American political capital and other resources will go into the Indo-Pacific. And this, of course, is relevant also for your part of the world, Rarida, for the Middle East and North Africa. The Americans will be there. They're not going to leave for sure, but the footprint will be a different one, and the willingness to engage and the use of military force, different, also based on the experience of the last few years. So I think we're looking at a different world and a different US foreign policy.
Thank you very much, Boris Ruge. I can't thank you enough for this honor, great honor of having all of you. Stay with me till I tell you who, we're hosting another wonderful cast of brilliant people next week. It will be Sir John Scarlett, former Chief of the British Secret Intelligence Service, former Chair of the Cabinet Office Joint Intelligence Committee. Sir John's current roles include Senior Advisor at Morgan Stanley and Chairman of the International Advisory Group. It's called Equinar. We have Mina Al-Waraibi. She is editor-in-chief of the national newspaper, woman editor-in-chief, former senior fellow at the Institute of State Effectiveness and at the Yale World Fellow. She is also the former assistant editor-in-chief of Sharq al-Awsat. We have William Richards with us. He is an investment professional from the United States with over 40 years of experience in the global financial industry. He serves on the independent boards and as director, as senior advisor, a range of organizations, both not-for-profit and for-profit arenas. And we have the brilliant Amira Yahyawi, who is an advisory board member of Beirut Institute. She's an entrepreneur and 2016 Young Global Leader at the WEF. She is the founder and CEO of Moss.com, and she's also the founder of Al-Bawsala, a multi-award winning NGO in Tunisia that fights for government transparency and accountability. How honored I am to have you, how grateful I am to you, and stay connected, and we'll have you again with your permission, and thank you so much. Your Royal Highness, really, it's a special treat. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Goodbye, Arida.
Goodbye. Bye, Boris. Bye, Theodore. Bye,
Lovely.
Paul.
Thank you
Bye.
very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.